He was 7 years old. He weighed 51 pounds. He had a gap between his two front teeth and a habit of sleeping with his shoes beside his pillow, because he liked to be ready. On the morning of September 14, 1991, Owen Ramirez walked out of Pinecrest Elementary School in Laughlin, Nevada, climbed onto a yellow school bus, and waved goodbye to his teacher through the window. The driver dropped him at the corner of Mesquite Lane and Route 9, 2 blocks from his house, the same corner where Owen had been dropped every single school day since kindergarten. He never made it home. That is not a story about a child who wandered off. That is not a story about a tragedy that happens and cannot be undone. That is a story about a boy who was taken deliberately, taken from the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, taken in a town where no one locked their doors. And it would take 33 years, a DNA database no one could have imagined in 1991, and a phone call from a city 2,000 miles away to finally bring Owen Ramirez home. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to that Tuesday afternoon. Because to understand what was found, you first have to understand what was lost. Laughlin, Nevada in 1991 was not Las Vegas. People in Laughlin like to make that point. It sat along the Colorado River, separated from Arizona by a ribbon of brown water, surrounded by desert that stretched in every direction until it became nothing but sky. The population was just under 8,000. There was a diner called Rosie's on the main road, where the coffee was served in mugs the size of soup bowls. There was one movie theater, one high school, and enough people who knew each other's names that a stranger walking through town was noticed within about 30 minutes. It was the kind of place where neighbors still kept each other's spare keys, where children rode bikes to the river on Saturday mornings, and where a missing child felt as impossible as a thunderstorm in August. The Ramirez family had lived in Laughlin for 11 years by the time Owen disappeared. His father, Roberto, worked maintenance at one of the river casinos. Steady work, consistent hours, the kind of job that a man took seriously because he had a family to keep. His mother, Dolores, worked part-time at the front desk of a medical clinic 2 days a week and spent the rest of her time raising Owen and his older sister, Clara, who was 12 and already old enough to walk Owen home from the bus stop on the days Dolores had to work late. But September 14th was a Saturday schedule shift day, which meant Clara was at her friend Amanda's house, which meant no one walked Owen home that afternoon. Owen himself was, by every account from every person who knew him, a child you remembered. He loved encyclopedias. At 7 years old, he had already read through the family's set of world books twice, and had started on a third pass. He kept a notebook where he copied down facts that surprised him. The speed of light, the depth of the Mariana Trench, the year the Roman Empire fell. He wanted to be a scientist. He told his mother this often, in the serious, certain way that only children can. He had one best friend, a boy named Danny Ruiz, who lived 3 houses down, and on most afternoons they could be found building something in Danny's garage or digging what they called an archaeological site in the vacant lot at the end of Mesquite Lane. He had a dog named Copper, a red mutt his father had brought home from the animal shelter when Owen turned 5. He slept with his sneakers beside his pillow. Dolores had asked him about this habit more than once, and Owen's answer was always the same: I want to be ready. On the morning of September 14th, Owen had eaten 2 bowls of cereal and shown his mother a page in his notebook where he had written down every planet in order from the sun and their distances in miles. She had told him it was very impressive. She had kissed him on the top of his head. He had picked up his backpack, walked through the front door, and that was the last time Dolores Ramirez would see her son as she knew him. At 3:22 p.m., the school bus pulled away from the corner of Mesquite Lane and Route 9. The driver, a retired firefighter named Gerald Hooks, would later tell investigators that Owen had been the last child off his route that day, that he had watched Owen step off the bus and walk toward the neighborhood before pulling away. He had seen nothing unusual. No other vehicles on the road, no one waiting at the corner. By 4 p.m., Dolores had arrived home from work to find the front door locked, the house quiet, and no Owen. She assumed he was at Danny's. She called Danny's mother. Danny hadn't seen Owen since school. By 4:30 p.m., Dolores was walking the 2-block route from the bus stop to the house, calling his name. By 5 p.m., Roberto had left work in the middle of a shift. By 6 p.m., they called the police. Clark County Sheriff's deputies arrived within the hour. Owen's backpack was found 40 yards from the bus stop, in the weeds along the shoulder of Route 9, its contents still inside. The notebook, a library book on ocean animals, a half-eaten granola bar. The backpack was lying face down in the dirt, as though it had been dropped or tossed. One strap was torn at the seam. Deputies photographed it, bagged it, and began canvassing the neighborhood. They knocked on every door on Mesquite Lane and the 3 streets connecting to it. No one had seen a child. No one had heard anything. One neighbor, a retired postal worker named Hank Delacroix, mentioned that he had seen a white pickup truck idling near the bus stop around 3:15. A truck he didn't recognize. He had not thought anything of it at the time. He thought of it now. A photograph of Owen was distributed to every patrol unit in the county before nightfall. He was 4 feet 2 inches tall, brown eyes, dark hair cut short on the sides, a gap-toothed smile. He was wearing a red t-shirt with a small rocket ship on the chest, jeans, and white sneakers, the ones he liked to keep beside his pillow. Search teams moved through the desert brush along Route 9 with flashlights until nearly 2 in the morning. They found nothing else. No footprints, no clothing, no sign that Owen Ramirez had walked any direction but into the air. The investigation that followed moved fast in the first weeks, and then, like so many cold cases before and after it, slowed to something barely distinguishable from stillness. Detective Mara Vasquez of the Clark County Sheriff's Office was assigned to the Ramirez case within 48 hours of the disappearance. She was 34 years old, a former crime scene technician who had transferred to investigations 3 years earlier. And she was, by every account from her colleagues, the kind of person who did not let things go. She kept a legal pad on her kitchen table where she worked at night. She drove Mesquite Lane twice a week for months, at 3:22 p.m., the exact time the bus had dropped Owen off, watching the intersection, the road, the sightlines. The white pickup truck became the primary lead. Hank Delacroix's description was limited: white, 2-door, older model, possibly a Ford or Chevy, Nevada plates. But it was all they had. Investigators ran every registered white pickup within 50 miles. They identified 62 that fit the general description. Of those, 11 had male drivers with prior records. Of those 11, one emerged as the most promising: a man named Dale Pruitt, 41 years old, who had a prior conviction for contributing to the delinquency of a minor in Arizona in 1983 and who lived 20 minutes from Laughlin in a property just over the state line. Deputies visited Pruitt twice. He was cooperative, permitted a search of his property and vehicle, and had a verifiable alibi for the afternoon of September 14th. He had been at an auto parts store in Needles, California, where the store manager confirmed he had been for nearly 2 hours, beginning at 2:30. The transaction receipt placed him there. The truck was examined by a forensic technician and showed nothing connected to Owen Ramirez. The lead died. The file stayed open. While Detective Vasquez worked the official investigation, Dolores Ramirez worked her own. She had flyers printed at the copy shop on the main road and drove to every town within 3 hours of Laughlin, Boulder City, Kingman, Bullhead City, Needles, Barstow, and placed them in store windows, laundromats, post offices, and churches. She called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children every month to confirm Owen's listing was current. She appeared twice on a local television program about missing children, sitting very still in front of the camera and describing her son in the specific, deliberate way of a woman who knows that precision is the only protection she has left. She wanted people to know he liked encyclopedias. She wanted them to know about the notebook. She wanted them to know his name. Roberto Ramirez aged visibly in the year after Owen disappeared. He went back to work 3 weeks after the disappearance because they needed the income and because standing still inside the house felt impossible. Clara, who had been 12 that September, developed a habit of sitting on the front porch in the afternoons at the time the school bus would have come. She was not waiting, she would say later. She just needed to be there. By the end of 1993, 2 years had passed. The case was still open, but no longer active. Detective Vasquez had taken on a full caseload of new investigations. She told Dolores, honestly, that she had not closed the file and would not close it. She told her this every year when Dolores called. She said it in 1994 and 1995 and 1997. She said it for a long time. The years had a way of doing what years do. The reward poster that Dolores had taped in the window of Rosie's diner faded from color to something close to gray, but nobody took it down. Copper the dog died in 1999, and Roberto buried him in the backyard, and it was the first time either of them had cried in a long while. Clara graduated from high school, then from college in Reno, then got married and moved to Phoenix, and every September 14th she drove back to Laughlin because she couldn't imagine being anywhere else that day. By 2001, 10 years after Owen's disappearance, Dolores organized a small vigil at the corner of Mesquite Lane and Route 9. Just family, and a few neighbors, and a candle. They did it again in 2002, and 2003, and every year after that. Detective Mara Vasquez retired from the Clark County Sheriff's Office in 2007. On her last day, she took the Ramirez file and asked her supervising lieutenant if she could have a copy to keep. He said yes. She drove it home in a box and put the box in the spare room. She told her husband, "I'm going to keep working on it." He had learned, in 32 years of marriage, not to argue with her about things like this. By 2015, 24 years after Owen disappeared, Laughlin had grown to nearly 11,000 people. New developments had replaced some of the desert brush along Route 9. Gerald Hooks, the bus driver who had last seen Owen, had died in 2009. Hank Delacroix, who had seen the white truck, moved to a retirement community in Arizona in 2011. Roberto Ramirez died of a heart attack in April 2018. At the hospital, in his last hours, he asked Dolores if she thought Owen was still alive. She told him she believed so. She had believed it for 27 years. She was not going to stop. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserved better. If this work matters to you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes it possible to keep telling stories like Owen's. Now let's get back to him. Then, in March of 2024, something happened that no one had anticipated. Something that Mara Vasquez, who was 71 years old and retired for 17 years, would later describe as the phone call she had waited 33 years to receive. It began, as so many cold case breaks of the last decade have begun, with Dina. In the spring of 2022, the Clark County Sheriff's Office, as part of a statewide cold case initiative, had submitted biological evidence from the Owen Ramirez investigation to a forensic genealogy lab in Sacramento. The evidence in question was a partial Dina sample taken from the torn backpack strap in 1991, skin cells, preserved in an evidence bag that had sat in a storage facility for 31 years. It was a long shot. Many such samples degrade beyond usability. This one had not. The process works by comparing crime scene DNA to the profiles in public ancestry databases, the same websites where ordinary people trace their family trees, and using shared genetic segments to identify distant relatives, which investigators then work backward through generations to identify a single possible contributor. It is painstaking work. It takes months. It is also, in the right hands, extraordinary. The lab had returned an initial result in November 2022, indicating a possible familial match with several individuals in the mid-Atlantic region. The investigators assigned to follow up spent 14 months verifying those connections, eliminating possibilities, and narrowing the genetic family tree to a cluster of names connected to a single extended family based primarily in rural Delaware and southern Pennsylvania. Within that cluster, one profile stood out: a man who was currently living under the name Carl Dennis Morrow in a small city called Seaford, Delaware. He was 41 years old. On a Tuesday morning in January 2024, a detective with the Clark County Sheriff's Office named Raymond Okafor, the fourth investigator to be formally assigned to the Ramirez case since 1991, received a call from the genealogy lab confirming that Carl Dennis Morrow's DNA profile, voluntarily submitted to a public ancestry site in 2019, was a near-certain match to the partial sample from Owen's backpack. Detective Okafor stared at his screen. He read the probability figure again, 99.7%. He picked up his desk phone and called Mara Vasquez. She answered on the second ring. He told her what the lab had said. There was a silence on the line. Then she said, quietly, "I need to sit down." He waited. She said, "Tell me everything." Carl Dennis Morrow had lived in Seaford, Delaware for 11 years. He worked as a custodian at a local middle school. He attended a Baptist church on Sunday mornings. His neighbors described him as quiet, private, polite. He kept his yard clean. He brought in his trash cans promptly. He was not, by any outward measure, a man anyone would look at twice. His real name, investigators would confirm within 2 weeks of the DNA match, was not Carl Dennis Morrow. That identity had been created in 1993, 2 years after Owen Ramirez disappeared from a Nevada bus stop. His actual name was Gary Keith Lundeen. He was originally from Bakersfield, California. He had a prior arrest, not a conviction, from 1989 in Riverside County, for the attempted abduction of a minor, a charge that had been reduced and eventually dismissed. He had been 29 years old in September 1991. He had owned a white 2-door pickup truck registered to a Nevada address he had used briefly in 1991. But that was not the detail that stopped Detective Okafor cold. The detail that stopped him was this: Gary Keith Lundeen had a wife and a son. A son named Michael, who was 40 years old, who had, until investigators arrived on his doorstep on February 19, 2024, believed his name to be Michael Carl Morrow, and that he had been born in Delaware in 1983, and that his mother had died when he was very young, and that his father had moved them east to start over. Michael Morrow, whose real name was Owen Ramirez, had been living 2,000 miles from the corner of Mesquite Lane for 33 years. The arrest of Gary Keith Lundeen happened on a cold Tuesday morning in February 2024. Delaware State Police and 2 Clark County investigators approached the custodial entrance of the middle school where Lundeen worked at 7:14 a.m. He was taken into custody without resistance. He said nothing. He looked at the ground. The handcuffs went on. A school aide watching from the doorway said she could not believe it. She had seen this man every single day for years. She said he seemed so ordinary. That was the word she kept using. Ordinary. The charges filed in Nevada included kidnapping in the first degree, child abduction, and multiple counts related to the fraudulent creation of a false identity. Lundeen, who was 62 years old at the time of his arrest, was extradited to Nevada the following month. He entered a guilty plea in October 2024 to avoid trial and was sentenced to 30 years in state prison. He would be 92 years old before he was eligible for release. The call came to Dolores Ramirez on a Wednesday evening in late February 2024. She was 73 years old. She was sitting at her kitchen table in Laughlin, the same kitchen where Owen had eaten his cereal on the morning of September 14, 1991, and told her about the planets in order from the sun. Detective Okafor had flown out to deliver the news in person. He sat across from her at that table and told her they had found Owen. He was alive. He was 40 years old. He was in Delaware. He did not know yet who he was. Dolores did not speak for a long moment. Then she said, simply, "I knew." It was not triumphant. It was not relief. It was the sound of a woman for whom certainty had finally been confirmed by the rest of the world. The reunion between Dolores and the man who was Owen Ramirez happened in Laughlin in April of 2024. What was said in that room is private. What we know is that Owen, who had lived his entire adult life not knowing what had been taken from him, sat with his mother for 4 hours. He brought the notebook, not the one from childhood, which had been lost with his backpack. A new one he had started keeping sometime in his 30s, where he wrote down facts that surprised him. The speed of light, the depth of the Mariana Trench, the year the Roman Empire fell. Clara drove in from Phoenix. She recognized him immediately. She said later that it was his eyes. The case of Owen Ramirez changed nothing about the laws of Nevada. Those laws had been changed years earlier, in the wake of other cases, by other families who had done their own version of what Dolores did. What it changed was smaller and larger at the same time. It changed what Dolores Ramirez knew. It changed what Owen Ramirez knew about himself. It returned to him 33 years of a name that was his by right, and a history that belonged to him and a mother who had never, for a single year, stopped keeping his picture in her wallet. DNA genealogy has now been used to solve or significantly advance more than 500 cold cases in the United States. Owen Ramirez's case is the only one in the Nevada State database in which a missing child was recovered alive after more than 3 decades. The detective who first took the case, Mara Vasquez, was present at the sentencing of Gary Keith Lundeen in October 2024. She sat in the second row. She did not speak. Afterward, outside the courthouse, she said only that she was glad she had kept the box. Owen Ramirez had wanted, at 7 years old, to be a scientist. He works today as an environmental technician in Delaware, monitoring water quality along the mid-Atlantic coast. He has not left Seaford. He says it is the only home he has known, and knowing what it is now, a place a man chose to hide, has not made it feel less like home. He calls Dolores twice a week. On September 14th of every year, he is in Laughlin. He still keeps a notebook. He still writes down things that surprise him. What does it mean that a 7-year-old boy can be erased, his name, his family, his entire origin, and rebuilt as someone else, and that someone else can live 40 years in the world without knowing what was taken? What does it mean that the science that found him didn't exist when he was taken? And what do you make of a mother who sat at the same kitchen table for 33 years and simply refused to stop believing? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. Justice found Owen Ramirez after 33 years. Stories like his are why this channel exists. Because the truth, however long it takes, does not disappear. If that matters to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More stories are waiting in the description below. Thank you for watching.